Imagine being tied to a stake, firewood piled high at your feet. That was the terrifying reality for nearly 300 English people, publicly burned alive for what they believed. The person who ordered these executions, not some mad king, but a queen who thought she was purifying the soul of her nation. So how did a woman, once loved by her people, become the tyrant we know as Bloody Mary? To understand the fire, first you have to understand the girl. Before the blood and fire, there was a girl named Mary Tudor, born as England's most precious jewel. She was the first and only surviving child of the larger-than-life King Henry VIII and his devout Spanish queen, Catherine of Aragon. In her early years, she was the pearl of the realm, celebrated, educated, and adored. Her father, even though he was desperate for a son, doted on his bright, talented daughter. She was shown off at court, was brilliant at Latin and music, and was even made Princess of Wales in all but name, sent to hold her own court at Ludlow Castle. For a while, her world was safe and privileged. She was the undisputed heir to the English throne, a princess of European importance, and her future seemed locked in. But this perfect world was built on shaky ground. Her father's obsession with a male heir started to curdle his love into cold, political calculation. Whispers started echoing in the corridors of power about a new woman, Anne Boleyn. For Mary, then just a young girl, the world began to crack. Her parents' love, once the center of her universe, became a source of crushing anxiety. When the break finally came, it was catastrophic. Henry VIII, in his desperate rush to marry Anne, did the unthinkable. He tore England away from the Catholic Church, the institution that had defined Europe for 1,000 years. He declared his marriage to Catherine of Aragon null and void, and with a single, brutal act of Parliament, he declared his own daughter, Mary, a bastard. You can't overstate the psychological trauma of this fall from grace. At 15, Mary was stripped of her title, her home, and her place in the line of succession. Even worse, she was separated from her beloved mother, a cruel move designed to break her will. Catherine was banished to a series of damp, isolated castles, and they would never see each other again. Mary, once the heir, was forced to be a lady-in-waiting to her own baby half-sister, Elizabeth, the daughter of the woman she blamed for ruining her life. She lived under constant threat, knowing her father's anger could easily mean her own execution. Through all these years of humiliation and fear, Mary clung to one thing with everything she had: her Catholic faith. It was her mother's religion, the faith that told her she was a legitimate princess and that her father's actions were a sin against God. While England was forced to become Protestant around her, Mary's private chapel became a secret pocket of Catholicism, an act of open defiance. This faith, forged in trauma and loss, became her only anchor. It was a huge comfort, but it also planted the seeds of the religious fanaticism that would later define her reign. The death of Henry VIII in 1547 didn't end Mary's problems. It just changed her persecutors. The throne passed to her younger half-brother, Edward VI, a frail boy and a passionate Protestant. With his regents in charge, the Protestant Reformation in England kicked into high gear. Churches were stripped of their altars, old rituals were banned, and the English Book of Common Prayer replaced the Latin Mass. For Mary, this wasn't just politics. It was a sacrilege, a stain on the kingdom's soul. She became a living symbol of Catholic resistance for all those who secretly hated the new religious rules. Her home was a constant point of conflict, with Edward's council repeatedly demanding she give up the Mass. She refused, flatly arguing that her conscience answered to God, not to them. Her defiance infuriated the council, but as the king's sister, she was too popular and powerful to crush completely. She was, for all intents and purposes, a queen in waiting. The final crisis hit in 1553. Edward, just 15, was dying. He knew his Catholic sister would undo all his reforms, so he was convinced to write a new will, cutting both Mary and Elizabeth out of the succession, and naming his Protestant cousin, Lady Jane Grey, as his heir. It was a desperate, illegal gamble to keep England Protestant. When Edward died, Mary was summoned to London, told she was coming to see her dying brother. But she was warned it was a trap. Instead of walking into the lion's den, she fled to her lands in East Anglia, a region with strong Catholic sympathies. From there, she raised her flag and declared herself queen. What happened next was stunning. The English people, after 6 years of official Protestantism, rallied to her. Her claim was the legitimate one under her father's will, and many were angry at the blatant power grab by Lady Jane's supporters. Support for Mary exploded. The Navy and the Army sent to capture her switched sides. The Privy Council in London, seeing which way the wind was blowing, abandoned Jane Grey and proclaimed Mary the rightful queen. Her ride into London on August 3, 1553, was a moment of pure triumph. Cheering crowds welcomed her as their true monarch. After decades of humiliation, isolation, and fear, Mary, now 37, had won. She had the love of her people and the crown she always believed was hers by divine right. It must have felt like proof that all her suffering had been worth it. Now, she had the power to do what she saw as her sacred duty, to bring her kingdom back to the one true faith. But what would happen when that holy mission collided with the will of her people? Once on the throne, Mary's first moves were all about reversal. She immediately had her parents' marriage declared valid, wiping away the stain of her own illegitimacy. She freed prominent Catholics from the Tower of London and put them on her council. Her first parliament started dismantling the Protestant church her brother had built, restoring doctrine to how it had been in the last years of her father's reign. But for Mary, this was just the start. Her real goal was a full reconciliation with Rome, bringing England back under the Pope's authority. This was her life's purpose, the divine mission she believed God had given her. But to make that happen, she needed a Catholic husband and a Catholic heir. Her choice of husband turned out to be one of the worst decisions of her reign. Ignoring advice to marry an Englishman, Mary chose her cousin, Prince Philip of Spain. To Mary, it was a perfect match. Philip was the most powerful Catholic prince in Europe. To her subjects, it was a disaster waiting to happen. Protestants feared it would lock in Catholicism for good, while many others worried England would become a Spanish puppet state. The marriage announcement sparked widespread anger, leading to a major uprising called Wyatt's Rebellion in early 1554. The rebellion was crushed, but it showed just how deep the anti-Spanish and anti-Catholic feelings ran. It also hardened Mary's resolve. She now saw any disagreement as treason and heresy, two sides of the same coin. She decided mercy was a weakness. After the rebellion, the final pieces of her religious plan fell into place. She married Philip in July 1554. Then, in late 1554, Parliament, under pressure, revived the old heresy acts. These medieval laws made it a crime punishable by death to deny core Catholic beliefs. The punishment was horrific: public burning at the stake. The legal machinery for persecution was now ready. Protestants in England had a grim choice: conform, run, or die. For a queen who thought she was saving souls from eternal damnation, there was no middle ground. The stage was set for the fires. The Marian persecutions began in February 1555 and lasted for nearly 4 years, burning Mary's name into history as Bloody Mary. During this time, somewhere between 280 and 300 people were burned alive for refusing to abandon their Protestant faith. These weren't secret executions. They were public spectacles, designed to terrify anyone who dared to defy the Queen's new religious order. The process was methodical. A person accused of heresy was arrested and brought before a church court. They were questioned about their beliefs, especially about transubstantiation, the Catholic belief that the bread and wine literally become the body and blood of Christ. Denying this was the heart of the heresy charge. The accused were given a chance to recant and accept Catholic doctrine. If they did, they might be spared. But for those who refused, the sentence was passed. They were handed over to the state to be taken to the stake. The first to die this way was John Rogers, a Bible translator, on February 4th, 1555. On the morning of his execution, he was offered a pardon if he would recant. His reply was firm. "That which I have preached I will seal with my blood." His death sent a shockwave of horror through the country. Soon, the burnings became a horrifyingly regular event. The victims came from all walks of life: weavers, farmers, and their wives. But the most famous executions were of the great Protestant leaders. In October 1555, the respected bishops Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley were burned together in Oxford. Tied back to back, Latimer famously said to Ridley, "Be of good comfort, Master Ridley, and play the man. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England, as I trust shall never be put out." Perhaps the most significant victim was Thomas Cranmer, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, who had annulled Mary's parents' marriage. Under immense pressure, Cranmer signed a recantation of his Protestant faith. Legally, that should have saved him. But Mary wouldn't have it. She held him personally responsible for the kingdom's split from the church and decreed he must burn anyway. On the day of his execution, Cranmer found his courage. He dramatically renounced his recantation, and, as the flames rose, he thrust his right hand, the one that had signed the paper, into the fire first, calling it unworthy. Mary and her council believed these brutal executions would crush Protestantism. They were catastrophically wrong. The policy completely backfired. Instead of scaring people into converting, the burnings sparked disgust and hardened Protestant resistance. The graphic stories of the martyrs, spread far and wide by John Fox's Book of Martyrs, became powerful Protestant propaganda that would shape English identity for centuries. The fires didn't extinguish heresy. They created a generation of martyrs and cemented an image of Catholicism as a cruel, foreign, and bloody religion. The Queen, who wanted to be a holy savior, was instead ensuring she would forever be known as a tyrant. At the same time, Mary was fighting heresy. She was fighting a desperate battle for a Catholic heir. In September 1554, 2 months after marrying Philip, she believed she was pregnant. To the 38-year-old Queen and her court, it was a miracle. The news was met with joy across the kingdom. Mary saw it as a sign from God, a blessing on her marriage and her mission. As spring 1555 arrived, the royal nursery was prepared, and letters announcing the birth of a prince were drafted. But the due date came and went. Weeks stretched into months. There was no baby. By August, it was clear. There had never been a child. Philip, disappointed and frustrated, left for Spain, leaving his wife heartbroken. Historians now believe Mary suffered from pseudocyesis, a phantom pregnancy, where an intense desire for a child can trigger physical symptoms. But for Mary, it was a divine punishment. She became convinced God had denied her a child because she hadn't been strict enough in purging heretics from the realm. The failure of her first pregnancy directly coincided with the burnings getting more intense. In 1557, tragedy struck again. After Philip briefly returned, Mary, now over 40, once again thought she was pregnant. But this time, the court was doubtful, and her health was clearly failing. By the spring of 1558, it was obvious this too was a phantom pregnancy, likely hiding the symptoms of the uterine or ovarian cancer that was probably killing her. Then came a devastating national humiliation. In January 1558, England lost Calais, its last piece of territory in France, held for over 200 years. The loss was a massive blow to English prestige and Mary's morale. She famously said that when she died, the words Philip and Calais would be found engraved on her heart. In her mind, her body, her marriage, and her kingdom were all failing. It must have seemed like God had abandoned her completely. Mary I is one of history's most complicated and controversial figures. Was she a cold-blooded tyrant driven by fanaticism, or a tragic figure, broken by a lifetime of trauma? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you want to explore more of history's darkest chapters, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. By the autumn of 1558, Queen Mary I was a broken woman. Sick, abandoned by the husband she adored, and haunted by the belief that she had failed God, her reign was coming to an end. She had no heir. She knew her successor would be the one person she feared most, her Protestant half-sister, Elizabeth. With reluctance, Mary acknowledged Elizabeth as her heir, basically signing the death warrant for the Catholic England she had fought so brutally to build. Mary died on November 17, 1558, at the age of 42. Her legacy is one of the great ironies of English history. Her bloody campaign to destroy Protestantism didn't just fail, it did the exact opposite. The public horror at the burnings created a deep-seated anti-Catholic feeling that would last for centuries. The stories of the martyrs became founding myths for English Protestant identity. In her attempt to save Catholicism, Mary had accidentally made its return to England impossible. She had lit a candle for Protestantism that, just as Latimer had predicted at the stake, would never be put out. So what do we make of the queen who burned hundreds of people alive? You can't excuse the cruelty of her reign. The suffering she caused was real and unforgivable. But you also can't understand her without understanding the traumatized girl at the center of it all. The adored princess cast aside as a bastard, the daughter torn from her mother, the devout woman who clung to her faith as the only rock in a life of betrayal. She was a queen driven by a sincere, if terribly wrong, belief that she was saving her country's soul. Her tragedy is that in her quest for a holy kingdom, she created a reign of terror, leaving behind not a legacy of faith, but one of fire, blood, and a name that would forever mean tyranny: Bloody Mary.